I was going to die to know I'm going to live and go home and see my family.
Wow. You were trapped for how long?
We were trapped for approximately 4 to 5 hours.
What did you do during that time before you were rescued?
Well, we radioed for help with using our walkie-talkies, the fire department and myself. And we would try to keep each other's spirits up, trying to get through on our cell phones to our families. And
did you make a connection?
We finally did. Yes.
Wow.
I got through to my wife, and I spoke to her. It was a personal conversation, of course. But then I told her that I would have to give the phone up to the other firemen, and it was only right that they had to call their families just in case, of course.
There are a lot of dramatic stories like that we've heard over the past 5 days. About 60 police officers are still missing, 300 firefighters. And there's a firefighter story I want to tell you about today. It happened in Central Park in New York City. Central Park, if you haven't been to New York, is 2.5 miles long, about a half mile wide. It is an oasis for New Yorkers, and right in the middle of Central Park is an area called the Sheep Meadow. The Sheep Meadow is about as big as 10 or 15 football fields. It's called the Sheep Meadow because in the early days of New York City, sheep used to wander around there. Now people go there, they lay there to get suntans, they lay there to have picnics, they throw frisbees around, and today there were probably more than 1,000 people in the Sheep Meadow. At about 3 o'clock Eastern time in the afternoon, a fire truck started coming up the path that runs through Central Park, and on top of the fire truck was a huge American flag. All of a sudden, you started hearing a few people clapping in the Sheep Meadow, and then everybody, 1,000 people strong, started clapping, many of them standing. Sustained applause for about 45 seconds. It was a sight and sound that no one there will ever forget. Joey, back to you.
Gary, before you go here, I want to talk to you about this notion of trying to balance returning Lower Manhattan to some sense of normalcy and yet trying to resolve the security issues that must still exist in that area. After all, earlier in the day, we heard that a passport believed to belong to one of the suspected hijackers was found several blocks away from the World Trade Center scene. And I'm wondering if they're going to allow people to come back in, thousands of people perhaps, come back in to work, how they intend to secure this. There's still fires burning and all that. How are they going to secure it?
The southwestern tip of Manhattan, Joey, will still be closed to everybody but the emergency workers and the members of the news media like us. That's where we are right now. But where Wall Street's located is more on the southeastern tip of Manhattan, and that's where people will be allowed to go. They're not going to be allowed to take their vehicles there, but that part of Manhattan is considered secure enough to have the tens of thousands of people return there tomorrow morning. And
as well, there are residential areas we've talked about before.
There are different degrees of residential areas here and how they're dealing with it. There are certain residential areas nearby where people are not allowed to go right now. In certain cases, they will escort people to their homes to get things out of their apartments. There are other areas a little farther away from here where people have the option of staying. A lot of them don't want to, but they have the option of staying. So those are the two types of areas we're dealing with. But there are certainly some parts of Lower Manhattan right now where people are not allowed to go back to.
Is that a question of stability of the buildings or just being able to secure the area?
It's a combination of both. It's a combination. There are many buildings where there's stability problems and they're not sure about how the buildings will last. And there are other areas which are in a security zone where they don't want people to return to.
CNN's Gary Tuchman for us on the streets of Lower Manhattan. Again, the shared grief of an entire nation continues. At this hour in Miami, we're getting these pictures from our affiliate WSVN. People of Miami coming out into the streets there. Candlelight vigil at this hour underway. You heard Gary Tuchman talk about the growing stem of applause coming in Central Park earlier in the day as New Yorkers greeted firefighters of that city and recognized them for their hard work. Indeed, the shared grief in Miami at this hour as a candlelight vigil is underway to remember the victims of Tuesday's tragedies. Wolf?
I'm sure that picture, Joey, is being repeated across the United States. One of the big questions, of course, after these attacks on America, how can this country prevent the kind of suicide hijackings that made Tuesday's devastation possible? The U.S. Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta says today he has appointed 2 new task forces. One will include pilots and airline officials who will focus on ways to stop terrorists from getting into cockpits. The other will come up with ways to prevent terrorists from getting aboard planes in the first place.
Our national transportation system has become a target. Passenger vehicles have been transformed into lethal weapons in a profane and cowardly campaign of violence. This past week requires us to develop a new system that will move people and commerce safely and efficiently. And that is the mission before us.
Mineta says the new task forces on air safety will make detailed recommendations by October 1st. Many people involved with airline regulation and the industry already are racking their brains for ways to make sure Tuesday's terror never happens again. CNN's Jean Meserve looks at some of the proposals now on the table.
For pilots, the rule of thumb in hijackings has always been be passive, be cooperative, get on the ground and into negotiations. Tuesday, the rules changed instantaneously. Commercial pilot Paul Emmons was in the air.
And my co-pilot and I basically looked at each other and said, "You want to fly or fight?" And he had his big steel flashlight, and if anybody came through the door, he was going to go after him, and I was going to get the airplane on the ground.
According to the Airline Pilots Association, pilots and flight attendants, the airlines, the FAA, and law enforcement are engaged in an unprecedented cooperative effort to improve aircraft security quickly.
We are at war, and we're treating it that way, and everybody's cutting through the red tape, making decisions.
Among the changes being considered on an expedited basis, whether to provide law enforcement escorts, whether to arm pilots with weapons, and how to modify equipment like the cockpit door so it is a more effective barrier.
This new door that we want I hope by Friday, really by Friday, I want a certification process approved by the FAA and the manufacturer in ALPA, and I believe we can have that, and then on our way to getting that door.
Some airlines have told their pilots to do what they must to save themselves, their aircraft, and their passengers. Pilot Paul Emmons says if his plane is under threat, passengers better hold on.
You should be wearing your seatbelt.
What does that mean?
We can start to maneuver that aircraft so that he cannot function.
Depressurize?
We can depressurize the aircraft, we can throw it around the sky, we can do all sorts of things, and he won't be walking when it's over.
Despite the financial distress of the airline industry, the Airline Pilots Association says no security measure is off the table, no matter what the expense. But some aviation watchdogs are critical. They say the problems and the solutions were known long ago, and they ask, why are we seeing corrections so late? Too late. Jean Meserve, CNN, Washington.
And this note, the 3 major airports in the New York area remain open today, but they're running far fewer flights than normal. 3 days after commercial airlines were cleared to take off again, LaGuardia and Kennedy airports are running about half the usual number of flights. Newark International has been running about 3/4 its usual volume. While the nation copes with this unprecedented tragedy, many are taking time out to reflect on what it means to be an American. CNN's Brian Nelson went to New York's most famous square, where patriotism has found some fertile ground.
Suddenly, everyone loves New Yorkers.
We traveled from Huntsville, Alabama, to come down here and show our support for the New York citizens. Want them to know that we're here. We feel their pain.
And New Yorkers, it seems, have rediscovered their own love of America.
I think we've changed forever.
I am so proud to be an American right now.
Even here in Times Square, this shrine to American capitalism, where money usually talks, you're beginning now to hear the distinct sounds of a renewed sense of American patriotism.
The U.S. flag has become a fashion statement.
I think it's finally time we started showing the love of our country.
At the heart of Times Square, an American flag stands watch over the memory of the thousands lost last Tuesday, and to the thousands more never to see husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, and children again. Gazing up at the constellation of Times Square marquees, appeals to consumerism now compete with calls to patriotism. Times Square often reflects significant moments in history. It celebrated the end of a war that we remember being sealed with a kiss. And once again, the square is perhaps marking history, a renewed burst of American patriotism.
We're the United States of America, and I think we're truly united. And I think as an American, that makes me feel very proud.
And I'm proud to be an American now and forever.
While there is still much grieving ahead, Americans are grieving together as one. Brian Nelson, CNN, New York.
And this note coming up at the top of the hour, I'll have a special edition of Wolf Blitzer Reports. We'll focus on the military options now before the United States, including my interview with the Secretary of State, Colin Powell. To our viewers, stay tuned to CNN for all the latest developments. For now, thanks very much for being with us. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. As we leave you this hour, a thought about these last few days of pain and anger and reflection about what is important to each of us as individuals and to each of these individuals as part of one nation. A last word this hour from CNN's Bruce Morton.
The late Eric Sevareid, during his years as a CBS News analyst, wrote after one terrorist attack about the special strength of the shameless. He meant, of course, that people who are prepared to kill the innocent, who see the killing of children as an act of war, have a strength the rest of us lack. They'll do anything we won't. That is a feature of the enemy in America's newest war. They are shameless. They will kill anyone, do anything. Most wars are between the armed forces of one country and another, though civilians, of course, usually suffer in the process, too. But in this war, civilians are the other side's targets of choice. And the aims of this war are different, too. The terrorists are not trying to conquer U.S. territory. Their aim is to demoralize the United States, to make it afraid, make it retreat from the world stage. Osama bin Laden, for instance, would banish Americans and pro-American Arabs from Muslim countries. But there's another aim, to make Americans lose some of their freedoms, lose the openness in which we live.
The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. It is to alter behavior. It is to force people who believe in freedom to be less free by altering their behavior and redressing a balance between freedom and security.
Almost certainly, Americans will lose some freedom, more searches, longer delays at airports, an increase perhaps in the number of people stopped and searched in their cars or on the streets, increased use of ethnic profiling, and so on. Most people would probably happily put up with some of this, but sooner or later draw the line. At some point, and different people would set different points, at some point Americans would lose the freedom that makes their country what it is, a place with lots of individual liberty, with a great tolerance for different beliefs. Then we're in trouble. On top of the U.S. Capitol is a statue of freedom. A friend whose apartment windows look out at the statue has been making a wish this past week for the statue and the idea it stands for. The wish? Hang in there, girl. Let's hope she does. I'm Bruce Morton.